Good morning. It is Sunday, September the 18th, about 11:50 a.m. This is Shay Gibson with Weather Flow and Wind Alert, bringing you a tropics update. So we're looking at three systems in the Atlantic right now. The first one being Tropical Depression Julia off of the southeast coast. We also have Tropical Storm Carl out in the eastern Atlantic, more towards the central Atlantic at this point. And then we also have another system coming off of Africa known as Invest 96L. So kind of an active pattern remaining as we head into the last half of September. So the first storm I want to focus on is Julia. The winds are at 30 miles per hour, pressure at 1,010 millibars, and general movement is to the west at about 2 miles per hour. Almost nearly stationary. That's really been the case for this storm as it's been meandering off the southeast coast due to weak steering pattern and upper shear, keeping the convection torn off of the top of the system and limiting the vertical stacking and some of the convective features that would help strengthen it. So we did see a few days ago it did managed to re-intensify to a very minimal tropical storm, Julia, once again, but then was quickly downgraded to tropical depression, and it's been that way for the last couple days. So let's take a quick look at GRE on radar, and what you see is really, you can see the core of the system right here, just east-southeast of Charleston, and really there's just a lot of dry air wrapped into it. There really isn't a very well pronounced mid-level low over this system to help increase some of the convective activities, because the shear right now is from the north to the south, and we can see the cloud tops being blown off to the south. Earlier, several days ago, all of that convection was being blown off to this side of the system, to the northeast and the southeastern easterly quadrants, and now what we're seeing is the upper shear is coming from north to south, eventually coming from northeast to southwest, and then eventually, as the winds lean out more towards the east-northeast to west-southwest on the upper shear of it, we see some of that relaxing. So there could be a small window of opportunity for this system to strengthen a little bit over the next 24 to 36 hours. And if anything, it would be a very, very minimal tropical storm status. I'm not going to call that just yet. But what we are seeing is just some of the outer bands for right now, moving into the southeast North Carolina areas right now. Outer Banks, North Carolina, seeing some of that inflow of Atlantic moisture with some thunderstorms and convections. All these areas are still prone to seeing that from this system, even though there's a lot of dry air aloft. You're probably seeing a lot of clouds, in and out rains if you live up along the southeast North Carolina coast. For Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Charleston area, these northeast winds are actually becoming more east-northeast with sea breezing, and so you'll probably see some of those thunderstorms or active areas of convection just inland along the coastline. So there again, it really looks more like a broad surface low feature than anything else, and it's a very weak system overall, and it's been that way due to this upper shear, this persistent upper shear. And you can actually see in the last frames here that the shear is looking more like it's already starting from the northeast to southwest. So the further out that shear goes, the weaker it's going to become, and then we have a cold front moving in with southwest jetting ahead of it. That's another area of shear, but it could hold off for a little bit and allow this system just a small window of opportunity to strengthen somewhat. So here's the surface map of what's going on right now. Here comes our cold front down to the southeast region. This is going to have some southwest jetting ahead of it. The ridge feature that has been keeping the system to the south is well removed up here to the northeast now. It's generally just guiding sort of an east to east-southeast wind to keep this system in check near the coastline. And then what we have is we have southwest jetting ahead of the cold front, and that will all lead to moving this system to the north, which is why the National Hurricane Center is a little bit more confident in this system lifting over time. What happens beyond that is we're watching another area of high pressure dropping down across the Great Lakes that could actually be another capping mechanism to the system once it does reach North Carolina coast and actually suppress it and push it down into the South Carolina or Georgia coastline. By then, we hope that this area will be a remnant low and not have any strength on it whatsoever, but it doesn't look to go away anytime soon, especially after making this small landfall here along the North Carolina coast. We'll have to keep watching it. It's not over yet if that does happen. So that's very far out to tell right now, but we're going to be watching for that kind of a scenario. Now back to we're going to take a look at the water vapor imagery, and what we have is we have high pressure up here to the northeast. We also have another area of high pressure down here. Cutting in between is this sort of this tongue-like feature from an upper level trough, and that's helping create the gradient over the top of the system with that ridge coming down over it, the ridge that's here just east side of the Appalachians, and that's what's keeping that shear going from north to south. Now this is going to start retreating to the east, and then this high pressure, this ridge is going to climb up and around, and it's actually going to weaken. So there's an upper level jet that we also look at, and with this cold front coming into the southeast region, we also see that there's a dip in the jet stream. We can sort of see that right here coming across the Tennessee Valley, and as we go into time, we'll see that dip pulls back to the north, but it also allows for an upper level low, a very small upper level low, to pinch off down here in the south. And that's what's going to come over the system and sort of help to sort of dissipate it. And then that low will drift down into the Georgia coastline and dissipate altogether. So that's kind of what the models are seeing as far as the jet stream pattern, with the shear relaxing, giving that small window of strengthening. But then there's an upper level low that could get pinched off from the bottom of this dip in the jet stream. This is known as a Rossby wave when we see that dip, and especially when we have a low pressure that pinches off. This is more classic of a wintertime pattern where we'd see possible nor'easter or even a winter storm, but the low looks like it's going to get hung up just inland and then pushed into land in time with that high pressure building off to the north. So there's a lot of trickiness to the system right now. If we take a look at the numerical modeling for GFS, we watch as the surface low does pull up into North Carolina, just as the National Hurricane Center is showing, and then we see sort of a suppression, and we can see a high pressure coming across the Great Lakes at this point. Here it is right here, 1,022 millibars. It's not a very strong system, but it's just enough to keep this system suppressed down here to the south. And then as we keep going into time, we see that that low drops back down to the south and kind of dissipates as it goes down towards the GFS has it going down towards Florida. If we look at the Euro model, we can see the high pressure ridge right now, and then we see this dip in the jet stream developing, and then we see the actual upper low. So here's where this trough develops along the Euro, just along the cold front, and as we go into time, we see that actually pinch off that upper low just over South Carolina, and that's what we think is going to happen. And the system, as a weak surface low feature, will get wrapped up into this upper low underneath it, and then it will dissipate, and then this system drives down to the southeast. And we can sort of see that in the next frames of the Euro, where it just sort of goes down to the south and dissipates in time. The next one, Carl, over here coming up, should hook up to the northwest and around. We'll get into that one in just a minute, but that's sort of what the thinking is as far as the models go and what's going to happen with the system. It's going to go to the north, drift back down to the south, just sort of come apart and not really be that much of a threat anymore. So that's kind of it for Julia. We'll see what happens. As far as, let's take a look at the surface features right now. What we have is winds showing 19 miles an hour, gusts to 22 miles an hour. This is off of a slight gradient between that ridge in the Atlantic and some of the outer troughing from Julia, and we see some of the winds off southeast North Carolina. They're about 11 to 14. There's some in and out gradients. We're basically seeing mid to upper teens with gusts near 20 miles an hour. And as we get down into Winyah Bay, we see 22 miles per hour in gusts. Charleston, we're starting to see that northeast wind with those sea breezing, and we see sort of the east-northeast lean as we go into the afternoon. It's almost 12 o'clock now, so we're getting pretty close to that time. Usually around 12, 1 o'clock with this kind of a setup, we'll see those winds lean onshore. We may get about 10 to 14 knots down in this area. But for right now, it looks like everything's pretty weak, and the only things to really worry about from this system is going to be rip currents and moderate winds. There really isn't much else, I mean, except for maybe a few thunderstorms that are able to make their way into shore. If there's some additional moisture, some of those thunderstorms could be kind of strong at times. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look over at Tropical Storm Carl now. The winds, this is a very weak tropical storm at 40 miles per hour. The pressure estimated at 1,006 millibars. General movement is to the west at 13 miles per hour. The track for this takes it off to the west in time, west-northwest, and then develops it into a hurricane by Thursday. So we're not sure. Some of the intensity tracks or intensity models bring this up to category 1, 2, or 3, but this is not for sure yet either. So look at the central Atlantic. Here is Carl right here, and we see a lot of dry air being wrapped into the system. It's still fighting with some of the Saharan air layer and the Saharan dust. In fact, if we look here, we can see where this dust is still being wrapped into the core. Sometimes when they come off of the African coast, we see this jetting bringing down from the northwest some of the Saharan dust aloft at the mid-levels, and it gets wrapped up into these systems, and then they trail off to the west, and then they fight with them. They fight with the dust for several days to come. So that's what's going on with Carl right now. We still see some of this dust being peppered all around into the system, and as it goes off further to the west, we do think it'll dispel most of that drier air, and it will become it will move into an area more favorable for development. So a little bit hard to tell. There's been a lot of hype about it on its intensity and also some of the wave model charts, but we'll just have to wait and see what it's going to do over the next 48 hours to see whether or not it's going to kick up some rather large waves along the East Coast. If we look at the National Hurricane Center graphicast, right now the seas are only at about 12 feet, 8 to 11 feet around the outer core. Julia's seas are only about 8 feet offshore of Charleston, South Carolina. And so that's pretty much it for Carl. We'll have to just watch this system as it tries to fight off some of that Saharan dust and intensify the next few days. There's also an upper level low. If we look ahead of it, there's an upper low feature, and we also have this dry air coming down. So it does have some fight ahead of it as it heads towards just north of the Leeward Islands. That's the general track. We do think it will go just north of the Leeward Islands. And in fact, if we look at the National Hurricane Center, again, we can see that track just going north of that area. So there shouldn't be any major impacts to that. The general track for this in the future beyond Friday does take this system hooking back out to sea. So we do think it will be a fish storm. There isn't any real evidence to have the United States worried about the system whatsoever. So that's pretty much it for that storm. We also have Invest 96L, the National Hurricane Center, giving this one a 40% chance over the next 48 hours, 70% chance over the next 5 days. If we look at the Saharan air layer, once again, we do see the system coming off the coastline. There's a little bit of dust being wrapped down into it, but not quite as much as Carl had when it came off. So this system may actually have a better chance at developing. The general track is to take this system to the northwest as well, and that really is going around the ridge that develops over in the Atlantic. The high pressure that develops up here well to the north with the steering mechanism going in this direction clockwise should be able to pull this system off to the northwest as well. So no immediate threat from anything coming off the African coast for the United States. And as always, even when they come off of the shore of the African coast, we can't always tell if they're going to make it all to the United States just yet. It's just too far out to tell. What we can tell is that the water vapor, precipitable water around Carl is what's keeping the system together. You can see the dry air inclusion around the eastern side of it trying to wrap all the way up into the core of the system, but there's enough of a moisture shield wrapped around it to keep it going. This one coming off the coast now has a much larger moisture shield, so Invest 96L looks like it could intensify a little bit quicker as it passes over the Cape Verde Islands. So that is pretty much it for all of those three systems. If we look at the Graphicast for the peak of the hurricane season, we can see right now we are about here, midway through September, a little over midway through September, and the activity generally starts to trend downwards for hurricane activity. But we also see down here that the line keeps it active. So even though we're on the latter half of the season, we are also in the most active part of it. So we can't forget that. We also have a spike here in October to look at. So we can't rule out any possibilities of anything right now. We're still very much in the active part of the season. I wanted to take a look at the sea surface temperatures, and we can see where Julia is off the coastline right here. Over very warm water. Once again, just to sort of reiterate on Julia how there's still that window of opportunity. The warm surface waters could be of help, but we also see some of these cooler waters being driven down by persistent northeast winds, pulling some of this Labrador current down from the areas off of the Chesapeake Bay, which is cooler water along the coastal shallow shelves just off the Carolina coast. So these water temperatures are starting to come down out here just west of the Gulf Stream. So that's something to look at as far as the future goes, is how long these northeast winds are going to persist and keep this cool water coming down along the shelf waters of the Carolinas. That could limit any strengthening in any systems that come near our coastline as well. So that's one other feature I wanted to add. I meant to add that a little bit earlier, but I think that's going to pretty much do it for the Tropics update. And if anything changes, we'll be watching Julia closely since that's the closest to the coastline. And then we'll also be watching the wave model charts for Carl if that storm intensifies to a hurricane. We don't know yet if it's going to be a Category 1, 2, or 3 if it does intensify to a hurricane, but if so, I'm sure there'll be a lot of surfers that are happy about that. We just don't know yet for sure. So until next time, take care and thanks for watching.